The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. This is Dustin Roberts, and if you called in for a webinar called A Chapter Success Through Men of Merit, you're in the right place. First of all, just for housekeeping purposes, I hope everybody can hear me okay, but if you're having any trouble with that, please let me know or let us know through the chat feature on the webinar. And we'll try to address that if we see anything like that come through in the notes. I'd like to thank you for joining us today to learn a little bit more about the Men of Merit Standards program. We really appreciate your time. First, I'd like to introduce Nicole Belinsky, the Chapter Development Director for the fraternity and the staff member that works most closely with this program. As I mentioned, my name is Dustin. I'm a Bradley University class of 2003, a member of DU, a current member of the fraternity's board of directors, and the current chairman of the Men of Merit Standards Committee. Briefly, what we're going to cover today, our goal is to provide you with some additional insight into the program to supplement the full details and information you can find online or by having conversations with volunteers and staff members. I would encourage all of you, especially if you haven't before, to visit the webpage deltau.org/Men of Merit whenever you have a chance. It does have the full program outline as well as some additional forms that you'll find are useful throughout the year for submitting information. It kind of gives you a little bit of a rundown of the workflow. Some of that stuff we'll cover here, but a lot of it goes into more detail than what we'll take up for time purposes this morning. We will discuss a little bit about how the program got started, how it operates, and who serves on the Men of Merit Committee. Nicole is going to review important information about the timeline and data collection elements involved with each of the standards. We will wrap up with some trends we've seen over the past few years, how you can help as advisors specifically, and try to cover any questions that you might have. If you would, feel free to try to submit questions as concise as possible in the chat function of the webinar, and we'll try to take a look at those when we get towards the end as time permits. We anticipate only taking up about 30 minutes of your time today. So just a little history or background on the program itself. Back in 2014, the board of directors and the headquarters staff recognized the need to reallocate and support or the support that was being provided by volunteers to focus more than just chapters, focus more on just chapters that were underperforming or those that were doing exceptionally well. The concern was that those chapters performing at an average capacity or kind of that middle, maybe 60–80%, were often overlooked. So the board and the staff brainstormed what a program might look like that garnered excellence from those groups rather than letting those groups potentially gradually decline. At the same time, the board of directors was in discussion regarding updating the minimum standards for a chapter. So with those two conversations occurring simultaneously almost, a program evolved that was designed to support, engage chapters on their performance before there was a decline, ideally, in meeting the fraternity's expectations. To determine what metrics would be measured, a list of standards was developed and brought to the 2015 Leadership Institute, where members were able to provide feedback, and the Undergraduate Advisory Board, or UGAB, was specifically utilized as a focus group. Based on that feedback, the staff and the board of directors formally implemented the Men of Merit Standards program for the 2015-2016 academic year. The guiding philosophy being that chapters will perform and operate at a higher level when there are relevant and structured benchmarks to achieve. Just a little overview on how the program kind of works. It now serves first and foremost as an annual assessment tool to help the fraternity better allocate resources to serve chapters. We like to try to use our resources as efficiently as possible, being a nonprofit organization with limited resources. Throughout the year, the fraternity staff primarily collects data and information pertaining to each of our 11 metrics, which we'll go over in a little bit more detail here in a few minutes. Some of these are reported by chapters or host institutions, such as or PK. Others of those are simply measured by the fraternity, such as things like program attendance, regional leadership academies, and Leadership Institute, and GSI, and other programs. At the end of each academic year, then a Men of Merit scorecard is compiled with that data that's been collected and completed and provided to each chapter during the first couple of months of the summer, generally before LI at the end of July. This is used to kind of help frame the conversation for possible improvement plans over the following year, which is something that's a cornerstone to what the committee does. So a little more on the committee. The Men of Merit Committee plays an active role in those efforts. It consists usually of about 8 to 12 volunteers, most of whom are professionals in higher education administration, are former fraternity staff members, or in some cases both. Many of them have been volunteers with the fraternity in other capacities previously, and some of them have not, and we're always looking for people to kind of keep on a bench, more than maybe any other committee that I've been involved with as a volunteer for the organization. We feel it's very important that a certain level of experience be considered because of the assessment and the work that we're doing to kind of help supplement the support for chapters and their operations. Since the creation of the Men of Merit Standards Program, the committee's had a role of working with those chapters that primarily that don't perform to a minimum expectation in a majority of the standards. So usually we kind of look for groups that are scoring below minimum in at least 6 of those categories, and we focus first and foremost on those groups. This year was the first year that we formalized the process and some accountability measures. Now that we've been doing this for a full 3 academic years, we've learned quite a bit, and we're moving into more of that execution. So chapters were sent their Men of Merit scorecard at the end of July, and depending on their performance over the past year, some were asked to complete an action plan for improvement for the upcoming year. As those chapters completed action plans, a committee member was assigned to work with the chapter to provide support, direction towards resources, and provide a extra layer of accountability for the goals that they'd set for themselves. In addition to a committee member, typically there's a staff liaison assigned to each chapter, and province governors are also brought into the loop to help support those chapters and help them kind of raise the bar for the following academic year. So at this point, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Nicole to elaborate a little bit further on each of the metrics and the timeline throughout the academic year. Nicole?
Thanks, Dustin. So as noted here, and as probably all of you know, there are 11 standards that are measured throughout the Men of Merit program, most of which that are categorized through 3 benchmarks. So a chapter could fall at minimum, at expectation, or at an aspirational level within each standard. To quantify what is necessary to reach each level within a standard, we want to point you towards the resources that Dustin already mentioned on the website, and it's also located under the handouts point in this webinar, where you can go through and find what metric is measured for each standard in terms of at minimum, expectation, aspirational. To review additional information that is pertinent to you all as advisors, we're going to go through each standard as it's noted on the scorecard and emphasize due dates, advisor involvement, and additional insights that might be pertinent to you all in your roles. So first we will start with CEP, which is the Chapter Excellence Plan. There are 2 time periods throughout the academic year where CEP items are due. So if you look at the criteria that are noted on the website or on other resources that are offered, there are some criteria that are due at the end of the fall semester, some at the spring, but the fall submission deadline, which is the criteria that does not have an asterisk located next to the criteria listed within CEP is due on Sunday, December 30th of this year. The spring submission deadline is Friday, May 31st for all submissions. So that includes spring and submissions that are totaled for the entire academic year. These submissions occur through a form submitted on the Delta Upsilon website. And we as staff work diligently to review these submissions on a rolling basis in order to inform the chapters what they can do to improve, provide feedback, and provide them scores leading up to the deadlines and especially after the deadlines, as we do see most of our submissions occur after or right before the deadline period. More often than not, we see below minimum scores in the area of CEP due to lack of reporting what the chapters are up to. We hear pretty frequently chapters say that they completed many of the criteria and they should be eligible for receiving more points, but have just forgot to report during the process and by the proper deadline. So we want to emphasize to you all as advisors to hold the executive board members accountable to reporting the wonderful things that they're up to and holding events and completing tasks within their roles. And we want to emphasize providing evidence of the completion to receive all available points. So some of the best practices or examples that could be utilized to prove that a criteria was completed includes pictures of events, pictures of documents, agendas from events, some sort of descriptive outline and or letters of support. The next standard that's noted on the Men of Merit scorecard is our membership standard. So membership is reported by the university if a group is recognized by that university or institution, and we compare the DU membership totals to the IFC campus average. Generally on the scorecard, you will see the spring membership totals reflected, although oftentimes universities do provide us with both the spring and fall totals, and we can make that available to chapters and you all as advisors. The next standard is the Associate Member Education Program, often referred to as AME. So this standard varies a little bit to some of the others because there's only 2 qualifications for this standard. A chapter can either fall at expectation or below minimum for the standard. A chapter is deemed to be utilizing the Associate Member Education Process, or AME, thus at expectation if both their chapter advisor, so you all, and the sorority and fraternity advisor at their institution confirms that there was significant implementation of the program throughout the semester. So there are some times where chapters are found below minimum in this standard due to lack of reporting on an advisor or an institution's end, and we all as staff try really hard to provide those reminders to advisors as well as university advisors and the professionals that are working in fraternity and sorority life to provide us that information so that it can be affirmed that chapters are utilizing this education process. The Associate Member Education Workbook and the Facilitation Guide are both available on our website in PDF form, which lends them to be easily printed for use. That's generally the most economical way for chapters to obtain the education. But also if a chapter would like a bound copy of the workbook and the Facilitator's Guide, chapters can request that they are sent from IHQ and they will be delivered to an address provided by the chapter for the associate member education process. The next standard being scholarship. So average chapter GPAs are reflected on scorecards for both the fall and the spring academic semesters. These GPAs include the chapter's associate members and any other individuals that are reflected on the roster that is submitted to the institution's fraternity and sorority life office. I emphasize that because sometimes chapters do become frustrated because they believe that the GPAs that are reported and reflected are not reflective of their true membership, which is due to an appropriate roster not being submitted to their fraternity and sorority life office. The GPA points that are collected and reflected include the chapter's GPA, cumulative GPA for the semester, the all fraternity average GPA, and the all men's average GPA. There are some times where we as staff struggle to collect GPAs from the university until the chapter submits forms and fulfills all obligations to the institution. And we ask for y'all's help to ensure that all required reporting is provided to fraternity and sorority life staff at the given institution by the end of the academic term so that we can collect this information and appropriate reflect it and provide the appropriate standard for the chapter in those ways. Moving on to learning assessments. So it is the expectation that at the end of this academic year, all members of every chapter will have completed Greek Life EDU. It is important to note that within Greek Life EDU, there are indeed two parts, and there is a lapse time of 30 days that must occur in between part 1 and part 2 of Greek Life EDU. Both portions must be completed in entirety and prior to the due date in order for the chapter to have the proper completion reflected within Men of Merit. A best practice is for the VP of Member Education or Associate Member Coordinator to keep track of the associate members' Greek Life EDU completion. The other required learning assessment that's reflected within the learning assessment standard is the membership outcome survey, which is sent to all members via the email that they note on their bio cards in the month of February. Each member of every chapter is required to complete this survey annually. Moving on to loss prevention. So this information that's reported on the Men of Merit scorecard is reported by the Director of Loss Prevention in her interactions with the chapters throughout the academic year. If a chapter has an alcohol-free facility and or adopted the substance-free housing plan early, it's reflected within this standard. Whether or not there has been an LP violation in the past academic year is reflected in the standard. As well as the percentage of credits taken into consideration when configuring the loss prevention assessment fees, which is noted here and broken down. I will let you all view this for a moment. This document is also available on our website. So next we move into finances. When configuring the Men of Merit scorecard, we look at the status of the chapter's finances and what is due to the fraternity at the end of the fiscal year. If a chapter has worked with Kelsey, which is the other chapter development director within the chapter development team, or another staff member to set up a payment plan in regards to the chapter's debt, then a chapter may still find themselves meeting minimum expectations within their Men of Merit scorecard. However, if there is no payment plan set up and the chapter is in debt, it will also be reflected negatively on the scorecard. Next is service. So this year's service hour reporting will look a little bit different due to our partnership with the Helper Helper application. There was a webinar hosted in September by our partner at Helper Helper to walk advisors as well as chapter members through that process. So the form to submit service hours on the website to verify those hours will soon be dissolved, and we will be leaning on our Helper Helper partnership to report those hours. These hours will still be due at the end of May, and we do encourage that you look to the website and the resources that are available for Helper Helper to well verse yourself in terms of reporting those service hours in the new format. So moving on to advisory support, on May 31st in the spring, the advisory support verification form is due through the website. This standard is entirely self-reported. And it includes how many advisors are on your advisory board, how frequent the communication is with chapter leadership, if there is a housing corporation, if that's appropriate for a chapter, the amount of webinars reviewed, and the extent that the associate member education process and plan was followed. And you'll note on the screen, this is exactly what the form looks like. That is to be submitted by May 31st, 2019 for this academic year. Our next standard is the DU educational program attendance. So that takes into account attendance at the Global Service Initiatives Project, GSI, UIFI, Leadership Institute, President's Academy, RLA, the Regional Leadership Academy, and DUAL, the Emerging Leaders Program that is facilitated by DU. Sometimes this gets tricky, as we do require that if scholarships are available to a chapter, that they do utilize all available scholarships. So sometimes chapters will find themselves in a place where they have attended a certain amount of programs to grant them at a certain level within each standard, but they did not utilize all of the scholarships that were provided to them, and so they will fall below minimum in that way. The LI attendance reflected is that of the summer prior to the academic year. So for example, for the 2018 to 2019 Men of Merit evaluation, the Leadership Institute held this past July in Scottsdale will be reflected within the Men of Merit results. For our last standard, it is philanthropy that is noted on the scorecard. This is fundraising specifically for the Global Services Initiatives, and there are 3 ways to submit those funds that are collected for GSI to IHQ. You could do this via credit card on the website. It's a form to be completed. You could also mail a check to IHQ utilizing our mailing address, or you can call IHQ during business hours, and Jana would be happy to walk a chapter through submitting their funds and providing account information. So like Dustin noted earlier, this is just additional information and context regarding the 11 Men of Merit standards, and we encourage you to look at the handout that's noted within this webinar, as well as resources on the website to view what is specifically noted to get to each level within each standard. Dustin, I'm going to give it back to you.
Thanks, Nicole. So here's another image of the scorecard that each chapter is provided annually with a rundown of those 11 metrics. And I hope that helped to kind of shed some light on how each of those is collected and when throughout the year, because they all vary and are special in their own way. So another topic we wanted to cover, just some trends that we've seen. Now we've been tracking this information over the past 3 academic years. It's gone by very quickly, but it has provided us with a little more information to help guide us and drive the program forward in the future. So some of those points we wanted to highlight for you all today are about 24 chapters this past academic year were actually below minimum in 50% or more of the categories that we measured. So that means at least 6 categories out of the 11. Those are typically the chapters that we will focus on first in terms of requesting an action plan and getting a Men of Merit committee member assigned to them to help with some additional chapter support throughout the following academic year to track their progress. And we're very happy to say that about half of those chapters are fully engaged and have drafted action plans of their own in the first month of the academic year. The second thing is that the CEP is really the standard that tends to drive a lot of other standards or correlate pretty heavily with a lot of other standards. What we see with that is the CEP is actually the standard that fell below the minimum the most frequently. As a reminder, it's a score of 60% completion that's needed to achieve the minimum benchmark. Of the chapters that did meet the minimum standard or higher in the CEP category, all of them also scored in the top two categories, being expectation or aspiration, in the advisory support standard. So that correlation is between the CEP and the advisory support metrics specifically. There are also notable positive correlations between chapters that meet aspirational levels in advisory support and accounts receivable, which is probably not a surprise to many of you on the phone. And in addition, we find loss prevention, associate member education, and accounts receivable were the standards that chapters most frequently scored at either expectation or aspiration. So those were the ones that we saw were the most frequently in the top two categories. So an important question is really, as advisors, what can you do to support, obviously, the chapter and these efforts in particular? In general, advisors can support chapters in all of these areas, as I'm sure you're all well aware. In particular, what we really wanted to force out is a kind of but we did that mentality. Nicole mentioned that a lot of times what we find is really that the metric is not as much about what the chapter has done, but what the chapter has reported, and that's an easy that we feel like that's an easy win. And if nothing else, that might build a habit that translates indirectly to some other successes in the chapter operations, or helps them to kind of document some additional programs or processes. We also try to emphasize the efforts to utilize the CEP as a planning tool for some of the reasons that I just mentioned. Measuring performance in other categories tend to also increase when we see the CEP score increase. And going back to a minute ago, a lot of the times that can be done simply by more diligently reporting some of the things that the chapter is doing. So as a quick reminder from the advisory support standard, in particular, however, here are some of the benchmarks, just kind of going in the middle there, the expectation level. For example, what we're looking at is the chapter has an advisory board. In this case, it would be with a total of 5 members, including one, or at least one, that is in weekly contact with chapter leadership. If a facility is involved with that chapter, a separate housing corporation exists, and advisors participate in 3 or more webinars annually, such as this one right now. As a reminder, these webinars don't need to be attended live to receive credit. They are saved. I believe that's under resources and advisor resources on the website. And there is some self-reporting involved to get credit for that. So finally, just to kind of recap some of the timeline and deadlines that Nicole mentioned through the individual metrics, we'll leave that up for just a moment. But I want to add, in addition, we have attached a copy of the Meta-Merits program PDF to the webinar handouts here. There's a handout section in your control panel. If you happen to be able to access that or see that, I believe the PDF is available for you there. If not, that's also available on the website, deltau.org/Men-of-Merit. And it's a quick 10-page PDF that goes through each of the metrics and overviews some of the things that we've discussed today. That concludes the information that we've prepared for you today. If we have any questions, we'd be happy to take a look at those at this point. Nicole, does it look like we have any questions coming through via chat? I'm not sure if I would see those on my end.
We do have some questions coming through the questions tab. We did have a question regarding what the measurements for advisor support were. So I will just go ahead back to that slide so we can glance at this one more time. Again, it's taking into account how many advisors do exist on the advisory board, how frequently they are in contact with chapter leadership, and then how many webinars are attended annually.
Okay, great. Yep, so the minimum standard there is the chapter has an advisory board with at least 3 members, including at least one who is in weekly contact with the chapter leadership, as a separate house corporation if applicable, which is consistent across all those benchmarks, and has participated in at least 2 webinars a year. And those webinars are done at least once a month. There's actually 2 in October at least, off the top of my head, including this one.
Yep, we also have a question regarding when the CEP reporting form will be live on the website. I know that this sounds like a broken record. However, we are doing the most we can as a staff to get that live for chapters leadership to begin reporting their chapter excellence in the criteria for those items. We are hoping that that is very, very soon. And I know that the staff partners that we're working with are making that a priority to make that occur.
And Nicole, do you happen to know when that occurs, how it will be communicated?
There will be an email sent to chapter leadership as well as chapter advisors, I believe from staff liaisons as soon as that is available.
Okay, great, thank you. Other questions?
We do have another question. Would IHQ be able to provide scorecards and updates throughout the semester to know what has or has not been completed? Sometimes as advisors, we are not aware of what has or has not been submitted. They noted CEP, Men of Merit, and Greek Life EDU.
So the question is if we have the ability to kind of track progress throughout the semester of the year rather than having to wait until the summer for a scorecard. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
So we're not keeping an actual scorecard throughout the year that would be readily available by chance or for example online or something. What we would probably recommend is participating in the conversation or checking in with like with the Men of Merit committee member if they've got one assigned to them. Part of that process throughout the year involves some specific checkpoints. One of them is during the fall semester. One of them is at President's Academy when the president is at that program. One is at the Regional Leadership Academy, which occurs generally around February sometime, a weekend in February for most of the regions. That's probably the best time. Otherwise, maybe just at the end of the fall semester, if it's not a plan that has an improvement plan, or not a chapter that has an improvement plan and a committee member assigned, I would suggest maybe just checking in either with the chapter or if it's easier, connecting with staff, maybe with the staff liaison to see what the progress looks like in general at that point. Anything to add to that, Nicole?
Not in terms of Men of Merit. Some of the new format for CEP reporting will allow you to see the progress as you go, and you can track the progress based on executive member or executive position that's responsible for that criteria, and then also the semester that it's supposed to be reported in. So that should be really handy for advisors and will actually be made available to all members on the website. And as it pertains to Greek Life EDU, that is something that a staff liaison can support a chapter advisor in verifying. But we do want to put some responsibility on chapter leadership in terms of tracking who has completed Greek Life EDU. I know that I always recommend to the chapters that I work with to make that a requirement prior to initiation, that an associate member provides some sort of proof that Part 1 and 2 of Greek Life EDU has been submitted. We also have another question, Dustin, regarding webinars can be attended after they are live. And it was also mentioned about self-reporting. Did this individual hear it correctly?
Sorry, what was that last part?
So is it correct that you can view webinars after they are live, but then you also self-report attending those webinars? Can you clarify that?
Yes, that's correct. And I don't know if it was on one of the slides a little bit back on that particular metric, but that's correct. But webinars are recorded and can be viewed on demand rather than live, and self-reported.
We have another question. Does each chapter have a Men of Merit committee member assigned? If so, where is the list?
Great question. So specifically, a Men of Merit committee member is assigned to chapters who have been asked to submit an improvement plan for the academic year and who have done so. Typically, the chapters, at least at this point, just from an allocation of resources, the chapters that we have asked to submit an improvement plan are those that scored below the minimum on at least 50% of the metrics. So that was that group that we mentioned before. So there are about a dozen chapters that currently do have a committee member assigned to them for this academic year. So it is not all chapters. However, we do have a staff liaison or a staff member assigned to all chapters, and generally everyone does get some support in that way, and everyone also has a province governor. So those are resources for those chapters that didn't necessarily fall into that bucket and have a committee member assigned to them. If it is one of those chapters, or if you'd like to find out who that is, we can certainly provide that if you want to reach out to us directly.
Thanks, Justin. I don't see any other questions at this time. We can stick around a little bit longer if any other questions do come up.
Okay, well, if there aren't any additional questions, then I really, really appreciate everyone's time today, and also thank you so much for your efforts just in supporting your chapters as advisors. We genuinely appreciate that. If anyone has any further questions that we didn't address today or that you think of later, certainly feel free to send Nicole or I an email. Our contact information is there and can also be found online under the staff and the board information on deltu.org. So if there are no other questions, then I'll let everybody get on with their Thursday, and hope everyone has a wonderful day and a great weekend. Thanks a lot, everyone.